Going in three, two, one.
Hello, hi. This is Seku Radio in Florida, Sarasota, Florida. Today, our guest is Ryan Spicer. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
Ryan is a professional poker player, right? Ryan,
Yep.
if you don't mind, I don't know much about poker, but I watch it on TV, and but can you, before we start your interview, can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Yeah. So I'm a 28-year-old poker player living in Sarasota, Florida. Uh, I got into I got into poker because it was a way to earn a living through a game, and I had been playing games since I was around 12 years old. I started off playing a Japanese trading card game called Yu-Gi-Oh, which is very similar to Pokemon. And upon entering adult life, I realized that I didn't want to get into the business side of that game, and I couldn't play that game for a living anymore. So I sought out a new game, and poker happened to be that game.
Okay. So for a a person like me and others who don't know much about poker,
Yeah.
how would you define the game? What is the or can you tell us a little bit about how you go about the poker?
Well, everyone typically in a casino or a poker room, there's 9 players at a table, and there's a live dealer, and he deals everyone 2 cards. And to keep it as simple as possible, there'll be 5 cards that are shown at each betting round, and the person with the best 5 cards wins the hand. Or you can bet to make other people fold, and you can also win the hand that way.
Okay. Now, a poker game, how long it takes is 1 hour, 2 hours. In NFL, you have an idea how long a game will take. In a basketball, in tennis, you
So
can estimate. In a poker, is a time frame on it?
so there can be in the variant I play, there isn't, because I don't play tournaments. I My specialty is in cash games, and so cash games I like them specifically because they give me the freedom to create my own schedule, and I don't have to show up at a certain place to play certain hours. And a tournament would have a time frame, and they can range from anywhere from 6 hours to like 5 days. Um, where a cash game, they're typically running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And how I kind of systemize it is I usually play 4 to 5 hour sessions multiple times a week, and then I break those sessions up into like subsets where I'll play like a 2 hour session. I'll take a break, stretch, get fresh air, and then sit back down and play the second half. And then, depending on your own, like your personal preferences, some people I know will play 10-hour sessions. Um, some people play a little bit shorter. I personally find my sweet spot where I'm at peak performance around 4 to 5 hours. And then anything beyond that, I notice my mental game starts to deteriorate. And for me, performance is a really important aspect of the game to me. And I don't like playing to the point where I start making mistakes. So I cut my sessions on the shorter end so I can perform at a higher level on a regular basis.
All right. Now, you mentioned that a cash game. For when you say cash game for someone listening to us far away, is there any way you can elaborate on that?
So a cash game is you have 9 players at a table, and there's set blinds. So the most common game I'm playing right now is it's a 1-3 game. So there's a $1 blind and a $3 blind, and it rotates to the left every hand. So it basically, a blind is there to force you to play hands, because imagine, if there was no blind, there'd be no incentive to ever take any risk, because you could always fold and just play you could play only aces, which is the best starting hand. But since there's blinds, it forces you to play hands, and it also puts money in the middle that incentivizes people to steal, or to be aggressive and win the money. And that's different from a tournament, because a tournament, the blind structure increases over time. So in a cash game, the blinds never increase unless everyone agrees to it. And because of that, it just changes the way the game's played, and it's more of a long-term game than in a tournament. Like I said, it can be anywhere from 6 hours to 5 days. But a cash game for a cash game technically is infinite. It's technically always going, and then you decide when to come and leave.
What is the prize money for the cash game? How much money can you get?
So cash game, there isn't a prize, but you buy in. So for a simple example, at a 1-3 game, you can buy in for anywhere between $100 to $500, and your sorry, my roommate just came in. The prize, I guess, is your hourly win rate, and that's kind of determined on your skill level. And I guess common hourly win rates might be anywhere between $30 to $60, depending on your skill level, for a good player, at least.
All right. Now, you mentioned it before. I saw somewhere on your bio that focusing on fundamental would take you far. When you say focusing on your fundamental take you far, what do you mean about that? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so to keep it really simple, in live cash games, there's a lot of inexperienced players who are playing mostly just for fun, and because of this, the most important thing you can do in that environment is to play a very basic, simple strategy, and play it well, and not overcomplicate things. And I think that's something that a lot of players, they get in their own head, and they try to play fancy, or they try to do things that are just unnecessary, that are ultimately costing them money, versus just focusing on the very basic things, like focusing on like the odds, risk reward, and just very like basic things that over time just make money. Is that a good explanation?
Yes, we take that. Now, you also mentioned that you mentioned Buddhism. How Buddhism taught you said how Buddhism taught me to play better poker. Is that something you can elaborate on it?
Yeah, so I started getting involved with Buddhist philosophy maybe 7 years ago, and I initially started learning it just to learn how to meditate. And a big tenet in Buddhism is this idea of non-attachment, and that really relates in poker, because it's because poker, you're dealing with money, and there is luck involved. It's really important that you do your best to not be affected by what happens like day to day, because you can play great one day and still lose, and then you can also play very poorly and still win. So so I guess this idea of non-attachment, how it relates to poker is not being attached to the results of what happens to you day to day, and more focused on the underlying theory, which is stuff you learn if you're in it, and understanding bet sizing, understanding like when people are bluffing, when people aren't bluffing, and how to adjust, and focusing more on the strategy and less on the results. So an example would be if you get dealt ace ace and your opponent gets dealt king king. Aces will win 80% of the time, but they still lose 20% of the time to kings. So if you and your opponent say I put in $500 and they put in $500, and I have aces, they have kings, and say it just so happens that we do it like twice in a row, which is a very rare thing. But say it happens twice in a row, and they hit a king and they beat us 2 times in a row. Well, just because that happened, it doesn't mean we made an incorrect play. And I see it a lot where people will they judge the merit of their decision based on what happens rather than on having good reasons for what they're doing. If you follow that.
Right. And at one point you mentioned that poker is less about reading body language, more about understanding what a person action behavior is telling you. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So I think it's a really common misconception in the public eye that poker is like this game of reading people and knowing what they have and stuff, and it is to a degree, but it's not in the sense where you're going to look at someone's face and just like know what they have. And I mean there are cases of this, but it's not very common. That would only happen maybe if someone it's like their first time playing or they're very, very inexperienced. But I guess what I was saying in that is based on what someone does like in the game, you can kind of deduce through reasoning and logic what subset of hands they have. So if I raise and someone re-raises me, say I make it $20 and someone makes it 60, based on dynamics and the experience, I can reason out that somebody probably has a range of maybe queen and better, ace king and better, and depending on the environment, maybe more hands than that. But oftentimes in a live game, it's quite obvious what people have, and so basically that's more what I'm looking at. I'm not trying to read someone's body language. I'm more looking at like how much are they trying to risk, and in general people are very conservative with their money. So if they're risking a lot of times they have the goods, and their actions are kind of indicating the strength of their hand, and that helps you make informed decisions.
Good. Also, you mentioned that poker is driven by the concept of equity. Mathematical approach is what will elevate you above the competition. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so equity basically comes down to the idea I talked about earlier, where if I have aces and my opponent has kings, I have 80% versus the 20, and that's basically the concept of equity. And then that runs through all of poker, where say I have a flush draw, which is say I have 2 hearts in my hand and there's 2 hearts on the board. That means I have 9 hearts in the deck to make a flush. And to keep it really simple without going too much into detail, when you have a flush draw, you roughly have around 36% equity, meaning I'll make a flush 36% of the time.